Um, let's discuss somebody now that I've talked about in videos, and he's heralded as this great hero from the 2011 Stanley Cup playoffs, and he was. But how he got from point A to point B is interesting. Born on April 15th, 1974, he would be in his 30s before he'd be a regular NHL goaltender. He was drafted by the Quebec Nordiques in 1994 with the 217th overall pick. Never signed with Quebec, and wasn't redrafted. He was kind of an afterthought at the NHL level. And up until 1997-98, he's an East Coast Hockey League goaltender. So he's not viewed as being a great prospect or guy who's going to be an NHL goaltender, and he ends up going over to Finland. So he gets transferred over to Finland, and he was probably pretty happy with that. He had a good run in Finland, had a good run one season as well in the Swedish league. So he played quite well and won championships in Finland, put up fantastic numbers. June 4th of 1998, he gets the attention of the Edmonton Oilers, who were like, yep, and they throw him a contract. The Edmonton Oilers, who could have used a goaltender in the late 90s of a Tim Thomas stature, and yet he ends up in Hamilton and then goes back to Finland. The interesting thing with Thomas is his numbers weren't fantastic at the American League level. So rather than, criticizing GMs and teams for not seeing how great he was, his numbers weren't fantastic. He was just an average guy. And there wasn't anything in his numbers to state that something fantastic was going to happen. 1999-2000, he played for the Detroit Vipers of the International League, as far as I could tell, as a free agent. 2001, he joined the Bruins organization, but went over to Finland instead of playing for their American League team. And again, there wasn't any fuss made when he decided not to play over here and decided to play over in Europe because it's Tim Thomas. The guy hadn't played a game yet. 2002-2003, he plays his first games in the NHL. He plays 4. He wins 3 of them. 3.00 goals against, 907 save percentage. Boston rewarded him for that winning record by not playing him at all in the 2003-2004 season. And of course, 04-05, that's the season that there's no hockey at the National Hockey League level. So where does he go? Right, Europe. Goes over and plays in Europe. 2005-2006, coming out of the lost season of 04-05, things start turning around for this guy. Both Andrew Raycroft and Hanno Toivonen are hurt. So while they're hurt, he comes up and plays. He plays 38 games, 12 wins, 13 losses, 10 overtime losses, 2.77 goals against, and a 917 save percentage. That's not bad. And I remember watching this guy playing and going, okay, so we can just not worry about Raycroft and Toivonen, because after Raycroft's fantastic rookie season, things went downhill fast. And Toivonen just never seemed like he was going to be an NHL level starter. I could have seen him hanging around as a backup, but I never saw a starter with him. And yet, 06-07, Toivonen's the starter, and Tim Thomas is the backup. And this is when you'll see a lot of pundits at the time talking about Boston's goaltending not being good enough, and it wasn't, because Toivonen wasn't a starter. But he didn't last as the starter. Toivonen got hurt, meaning that Thomas, 66 games, 30 wins, 29 losses, 4 overtime losses, 3.13 goals against, and a 905 save percentage. The 3.13 and 905 are not great. But I saw a goaltender in Thomas that year that I said, you know what? Keep him as the starter. Boston have been going through a lot of goalies, and I'll do goalie history on Boston at some point soon. They've gone through a lot of goalies. So I'm like, all right, keep him. Keep Thomas, and wait, what? Nope. They made a trade with the Minnesota Wild to pick up Emmanuel, or Manny Fernandez, not to be confused with the wrestler of the same name. Manny Fernandez comes in. He's the starter. It's like, no, he's not. And he gets hurt. He only played 4 games that year. And again, the first comment is, well, Boston's hosed now. Their goalie's out. And I'm like, they're not hosed. They got this kid, Thomas, this kid that's 34. 57 games played, 28 wins, 19 losses, 6 overtime losses, 2.44 goals against, 921 save percentage. He's an all-star. Plays in the all-star game that year. Pretty fantastic run. And there was still talk coming out of that season of, well, Thomas had a really solid season, but can he follow it up? Well, clearly he heard the comparisons and all the comments, because 2008-2009 he plays 54 games, 36 wins, 11 losses, 7 overtime losses, 2.1 goals against average, 933 save percentage. That's sort of awesome. He's an all-star again. Not only that, he's a first-team NHL all-star. And he wins the Vezina Trophy. All of a sudden, oh, he's great. It's fantastic. All right. 2009-2010, 43 games played, 17 wins, 18 losses, 8 overtime losses, 2.56 goals against, 915 save percentage. He ended up taking kind of a back seat that year. A little bit. And yet, he'd come back in style in 2010-2011. So Tuukka Rask, Tim Thomas, great goaltending tandem, and Tim Thomas in 2010-2011, 57 games played, 35 wins, 11 losses, 9 overtime losses, 2.00 goals against, 938 save percentage, and he wins the All-Star. Or he is an All-Star. He wins the Vezina, the Conn Smythe, and he's a first-team All-Star, and he's the first player to do that in net since Bernie Parent. Of course, all three were done as well. The Vezina was won by Claude Giroux in 2006, which was amazing because he wasn't in the NHL yet. But this season was for the ages. So Bernie Parent, Tim Thomas, they're the ones. And it would be really hard to follow this up. And he really kind of couldn't. He played 59 games in 2011-2012, still got 35 wins, 19 losses, 1 overtime loss, 2.36 goals against, 920 save percentage. Still, very good numbers. He's still an All-Star. Played in his 4th and final All-Star game. But in the 2011 aftermath, Tim Thomas decided to not go to the White House. Which, he was the only player on the team that didn't go to the White House, and it didn't sit well with some, and it started this whole narrative that Tim Thomas, the player, and Tim Thomas, the guy off the ice, there were some that didn't like Tim Thomas, the guy off the ice, and some of the things he said off the ice. And he became kind of controversial. So coming out of 2011-2012, where he's already kind of a controversial figure, what does he say? I'm going to take the year off. 38, I need the year off. I got to think some stuff through. To which, as a Bruins fan, I said, "Oh yeah, it's not like we're playing hockey this year. You just take your time. You just take your time and think things through." And it was frustrating. It was very frustrating. And Tuukka Rask was the starter. Rask, fine as a starter, but I was very frustrated with Tim Thomas, deciding I'm going to take a year off. And it was just, he didn't feel like playing that year. So it was frustrating. And then he announces, "I'm coming back." To which Boston said, "We've already replaced you." And he goes to Florida. And this is where it gets really interesting as things kind of fall for him. He plays 40 games, 16 wins, 20 losses, 3 overtime losses, 2.87 goals against, 909 save percentage. He's playing okay average with Florida, but he's not Tim Thomas anymore. He is no longer the guy who got that cup in 2011. One of the things with a late developing goaltender like this, or a guy who comes in his 30s, is that fall off can start, and it can be rapid. And in his case, it was clear he was a step behind. So what does Florida do? They go and get Roberto Luongo back. And the first question that gets asked is, wait a minute, who's going to pump whose tires on this one? The 2011 Stanley Cup Final, Luongo and Thomas had a back and forth where one said the other, something about pumping his tires. And basically it was, "I'm the greatest. No, I think I deserve to be considered the greatest." Or that's how it came across. That's never how I saw it. I remember Luongo making the comments about Thomas. Basically, it was along the lines of, "Well, I'm playing too," and it got turned into this big thing because that's what the media does. So when Luongo's getting traded to Florida, and we already know that Thomas and Luongo don't get along, they ask Roberto Luongo, "Tim Thomas is there. Are you okay with that?" And Luongo goes, "Yeah, it's fine. That's ancient history for me. I'm sure it is for him too. It's no big deal." And the Florida Panthers go, "Yeah, it's ancient history." And they prove it by trading him to Dallas immediately. which I laughed pretty hard, and then I realized, oh, I cheer for Dallas. Crap. He played 8 games in Dallas. He had 2 wins, 4 losses, 1 overtime loss, 2.97 goals against, 902 save percentage. And that was the end of his career at age 40. 426 games played, 214 wins, 145 losses, 54 overtime losses. 2.52 goals against, 920 save percentage for his career. And I hear the comment getting made every now and then of, Thomas should be an outsider for the Hall of Fame. Maybe he deserves some consideration. I don't think he was at that level long enough. You look, he was an All-Star 4 times. He had 4 seasons where he had 30 wins. He had 5 where he had 20 wins. So I don't think he was elite long enough to qualify for Hall of Fame consideration. But what's always been interesting to me is how fast he rose and then seemingly how fast he fell. He put in one of the greatest performances any goaltender ever has in the 2011 run to the Stanley Cup for the Boston Bruins. And absolutely, Conn Smythe winner, he was the MVP, he was fantastic. And 2 years later, it's over. It's so weird. And what I mean by 2 years later, I know he played 3 years later, but by the end of the 12-13 season, he's a forgotten entity. So he goes from one of the greatest heroes in Boston's history to just gone in 2 years. And I'm trying to think of another hockey player that's done that. That's been a hero, Stanley Cup winner, and then is gone unceremoniously. But and I know people can say, well, what about Gretzky in Edmonton? Gretzky leaving Edmonton to go to LA, if you have a different owner in Edmonton, that doesn't happen. But in this case, Thomas is an interesting player. And it reminds me of what they say about goaltenders. They're always a little bit crazy. They're always a little bit outside of reality, a little bit outside of normal. And Thomas always struck me as being kind of in that category. But there you go. Tim Thomas, a goaltender who I don't think Boston ever retires his number necessarily, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did based on 2010-2011. I could see number 30 going up to the rafters based on 2010-2011, especially the fact the Bruins didn't win another Stanley Cup after that. 2012-2013, they got back to the finals, and they did it with Rask in net, but they didn't win it. So in the end, he's the guy who won it. He's the guy who was the MVP, and one of the most interesting stories of goaltenders I've ever seen. So there you go. The career of Tim Thomas. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. I will add him to the THG Hall of Fame due to the fact that, he played a long time in Boston. He gave me some tremendously amazing memories of the playoff run in 2011, and I can't hold him out for that because, honestly, he was pretty damn fantastic. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And thanks again for watching. I will talk to you again soon.